Hamas absolutely is seen by them as an existential threat.
Yeah.
It must be an acceptable cost to the home front. How long can they sustain a mobilization? And it must conclude in a way that is irrefutable. Back to that sort of reality on the ground needs to be changed for 50 years. Now, of course, what it won't do is kill the idea from Hamas.
What is your kind of feeling now about what is likely to happen in the next few hours? The Israeli Defense Forces extended the deadline for safe civilian passage. How much longer do you think they will delay?
Well, I think they'll delay that bit until you can get some sort of either humanitarian aid in through the Rafah crossing or can get Palestinians out into Egypt through the Rafah crossing. That itself is complicated because Hamas is a offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Egypt absolutely detests the Muslim Brotherhood. So the notion, for example, that there's one global ummah between the Muslim people is not really proven. And certainly Egypt would prefer them to stay in Gaza. So aid being brought in and the amelioration of the humanitarian crisis would be a good thing. In terms of the military strategy for this, it's partly determined by the weather. So for Israel to operate successfully, it needs absolute coverage by drones, satellite, and its air power, and it needs that for a continuous number of days. My understanding is the weather's not that good today, so it might be delayed for that reason. It's also worth saying that the intelligence soak you need to try and give more fidelity on where hostages might be is a good thing. But really, I see that there are probably 6 objectives for the Israeli forces. The first one is to destroy the rocket launch and storage sites so that leads on to the second, which would protect the Israeli citizens over the border. But there's no doubt that they will go in because they need to do the third objective, which is to dismantle Hamas's military capabilities, leading on to a need to decapitate Hamas leadership everywhere. So it doesn't just matter for the duration of however long this conflict in Gaza takes place. They will hunt down, I think, the military and political leadership of Hamas wherever they are. And the most difficult one is, of course, that notion of liberating the hostages.
Yes, which is going to be extremely difficult. I mean, everyone now knows, obviously, that Gaza is one of the most densely populated parts of the world. And one is used to seeing highly effective military machines, if I can put it that way, come unstuck when taking on effectively an insurgency like this. How on earth can the Israelis hope to have a successful incursion in such a densely populated, difficult area to navigate?
Well, the first thing is that the Israelis don't classify this as an insurgency, neither do they classify it as guerrilla or terrorist organizations. What they classify it as in their operational concept for victory in 2020 is a diffuse rocket-based terror army. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, it will be difficult. No one likes really operating in the urban area. But if you look at how they did business in Operation Guardian of the Walls, which was their 2021 operation, it's not only, you mentioned land, sea and air, it's also space power and satellite power. And in 2021, there were 2 Israeli units, that's Unit 8200 and Unit 99000, which had very carefully used machine learning, supercomputing allied to satellites and other sensor detail to produce precise targeting on both the subterranean tunnels of Hamas and where the military or dual use targets were. So the variable really for Israel is what they mean by victory. I've already outlined what I think they mean by their objectives. And of course, they want to ensure that Hamas can't be a force for the next 50 years. But victory to them, the 3 variables within that are it must be acceptable cost to the Israeli army. Of course, they're not going to define that, but Hamas absolutely is seen by them as an existential threat.
Yeah.
It must be an acceptable cost to the home front. How long can they sustain a mobilization? And it must conclude in a way that is irrefutable. Back to that sort of reality on the ground needs to be changed for 50 years. Now, of course, what it won't do is kill the idea from Hamas. And, you know, I think what people often miss about Hamas is a one-state solution. that is that Israel should cease to exist. We often talk here in the West about a two-state solution, and that would be a good thing. One of the problems and one of the probable reasons that the attack happened by Hamas is the fractured nature of Israeli society prior to the 7th of October, where certainly someone like Netanyahu, I think, will pay a hefty political price ultimately for this. Used to really talk about a three-state solution in a sense of separating Gaza and the West Bank as not some sort of potentially future unitary state with some sort of corridor between the two.
Well, Major General Chip Chapman, a former senior British military advisor and head of counterterrorism at the Ministry of Defence, thank you very much for coming on and shedding some light on what is likely to happen in the next few hours and days in Gaza.